Welcome back. We're on part 3 of discussing what the secret sauce is to great sex, love, and relationships. On part 1, we talked about what the self is, which is the key ingredient to allowing all this happen, and that is just our true core authentic self. And it has a lot of characteristics which we described, such as courage, such as compassion. You described it in the second video is what it's like when a self, this core self in one person connects with the core self in another person, and how self-to-self relationship makes the relationship stronger, and communicating from self, from self for parts allows that to happen. So speaking for one's parts. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the things that get in the way of this self-to-self connection. So ultimately, someone's self, one of the characteristics of self is, connected, authentic, and the self does want to connect with others, maybe not every other individual. There are parts that might get in the way of wanting to connect with certain individuals, but you might notice yourself at certain times where it's just like, oh, would like to connect with this individual. They seem pretty cool. And it might be difficult for that person to open up. There might be parts in the way of this self-to-self connection forming, even if that person ultimately in their core does want to connect.
So how would you name one of those parts?
So, like, speaking about examples
Yes.
of what those parts might be. So, I have a theory that just, being backed up by seeing a lot of clients, doing a lot of research on this, that there are two major protectors that would come up that would get in the way of self-to-self connection. And one is the fear of abandonment. So there are parts that might fear being abandoned.
So what you're saying, what I'm hearing is, this is a fear of abandonment protector that's like, this guy seems nice, but I'm not sure if I want to do that, because this person has probably been abandoned before in some way, or felt neglected in some way as a child.
Right.
And they don't want that little girl pain to get stirred up.
Right. And they're like, when you really connect with people, you know what happens? You get abandoned, and we're not going to let this happen again.
Yeah.
Right? And so...
And what's another one?
Another one is the fear of being, controlled or oppressed.
That's easy, right? Because so many people, that fear of control has something to do with mommy or daddy in the way that they controlled them.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let me put my guard up.
Right. Because last time I was in a relationship with someone, or a self-to-self, a really close relationship, which for a lot of people, the first really close relationship they had is with their parents. For most people, that's the case. And in that relationship, they might have felt controlled or dominated, overly controlled or overly dominated, such that they're like, okay, I'm never letting myself get that close to a person again, because if that happens again, I'm going to lose myself. I'm going to be controlled. I'm going to be dominated. I'm going to, the other person's going to try to get me to merge with them, and they will have control over me, and I won't be able to be myself. So a lot of people have protectors that come up and say, okay, that's never happening again. We're not going to allow this self-to-self connection to happen, and we're going to keep our distance, and therefore one's heart can't open up.
Yeah. Well, and this also plays out in the bedroom.
Oh, hugely.
Give me an
example.
Yeah, I've had a client a while back where the erotic goddess part, she knew that she had an erotic goddess part. Well, for all of us women, we have an erotic goddess part. And you have the Don Juan God part, whatever it is. We're all sexual beings. And so this erotic goddess part gave her lack of libido, just didn't want her to merge with her partner. It's like, okay, but what are you afraid of? What is this part afraid of? If you merged, had really deep self-to-self connection, because in the spiritual arena, having sex and orgasm, if you're really connected at that self level, it's coming to oneness. And David Data, one of the famous sexual and spiritual teachers, says it's finding God through sex. So that's extremely scary, because you're losing your separateness, your connectedness. And what would that mean?
Right. So for someone who either fears being controlled or fears being abandoned, it's hard to come together and be and experience oneness with another person, even for a moment, because that's a threat to the system. That is saying that, oh my gosh, we're going to get controlled, we're going to get abandoned.
And then we have to talk about the solution, obviously, once we paint all this. Okay, what's the solution then for people to get
Absolutely. How do you get out of this? How do you help yourself to open up when you can? How do you help other people to open up when you can? And right, and I like the thing that you threw into this, which is very important to discuss, which is because we're all sexual beings, we all have sexual parts. And those parts, can connect, and these parts that are afraid of being controlled and abandoned can get in the way of, and will get in the way of real sexual connection, in addition to self-to-self connection. What we're wanting to do is help people to have really good sex by having the sexual parts connect in the context of a real good, solid self-to-self connection. And that can be within a friendship, within a marriage, within a friends with benefits. It doesn't have to be necessarily within any certain model of relationship. However, when there is self-to-self concurrently with sexual parts connecting, you will have a really pretty freaking amazing sexual experience, and that's what we want to help you with. So
Yes.
I think we're good to go to the next video. What do you think?
Yes. So then let's just summarize. What happens is, at our heart, at our core, we want this self-to-self connection. But we have all of these parts of us that are stuck in the past, that are afraid of this oneness, this connection. So we have to do the work. So in other words, what we're saying is understanding the internal family system framework of self-leadership, reading the books, perusing the websites, my website, Percy's website, reading my book. It's going to get you started on the journey of understanding your inner landscape. But ultimately, if you want to cross the finish line and have extraordinary transcendent sex and love, it requires investing in your emotional health and getting to know who you are. And the selfleadership.org, the Internal Family Systems website, has a tab that has a listing of IFS therapists that are trained in this model. Eventually we'll have some sort of online course down the road, but right now what we want to do is teach what this is about, for you to gain the awareness of why you may be struggling in relationships, or why you're afraid to go deeper when you get to a certain state. And so it's not your fault. You didn't know what you didn't know. So that's why we're covering this deep spiritual psychology of sex and love, so that you can acknowledge those parts of you that may be afraid to go deeper. And now you know why you run into struggles and challenges and conflicts when it comes to trying to connect with somebody else at the romantic level, because there's too much at stake. Too much at stake with abandonment, with rejection, with fear of loss, because that's going to re-injure all of our childhood wounds over and over again. But we have to zoom out and understand that every single one of us has these parts within us. So this way, when somebody rejects you, it's their parts that are rejecting you. Right. It's not you, it's not yourself. And maybe your parts played into the parts war, and that's why you had to break up. Right. So it takes two to get the fire going and have it explode.
Absolutely.
So hopefully you are understanding a little bit of a deeper way of looking at this, and keep watching our videos, because we're going to go into some of the more specifics of How do you overcome conflict? You know, you've sent a angry text. How do you make up after that? How do you get into self so you could speak for the angry part of you that had to send that nasty message, so that you're not recreating that chain of bad interactions.
Yeah. So how to repair a
Yes.
self-to-self connection. Also, we'll talk about how to start a self-to-self connection. You know, what do you do when you see that attractive person in a supermarket and want to speak to them? How do you get yourself to a point where you can go talk to them? And
We'll have to do a role play on that. Percy will have to show me how he approaches people at Whole Foods and find states that way.
Yeah, no, that'll be fun. So yeah, we'll be happy to do that. But right, starting with the basics of getting into self and connecting with someone else's self.
Yes. All right.
Great.
Until next time, take care.
Be well.